perfumers don't create from a place of gender or bias in that sense. Jazmin Sarai is a combination of scent, sound, and culture, and that's broken down in jasmine, so the flower, the queen of all flowers, and then jazz for its improvisational quality, the genre of music, and then Sarai is a word used in many cultures, mainly in the Middle East, India, and Turkey, and it means palace, so it is the palace of scent and sound. It was kind of a mix of a few things. So in perfumery, there's a lot of musical language. So when I was in perfume school, I realized that we used a perfumer's work desk was called an organ. And we have top, middle, and bass notes, and things are in accords. And everything had to be harmonious, just like music. And I went into school realizing that there was a lot of connections between all of those senses, and because they're both invisible and they're time-based and they're emotional, I found it quite a natural fit. And I was also deeply inspired by the work of a man called Septimus Pies, who created the connections between scent and sound early on in the 1800s, so it's quite a while ago. And then also it was synesthesia, so I noticed that I had these ways of perceiving that connected multiple senses at the same time, and sound and scent were just a very natural way for me to perceive the world, and in perfume school, that's when I've noticed that they were kind of all connected. Perfumery in its essence is an art and science, so the duality between art and science and the convergence between the two is what I find the most interesting. I don't see it as a duality in that sense because they're intrinsically connected. It brings about all of these beautiful different disciplines and different industries in one, and I think that's what I love about perfumery the most, because as a kid growing up, I never really felt connected entirely to one medium or another, but once I found perfumery, I found that putting science and philosophy and psychology and environmental work and art and all of these different things combined just made the most sense for me. So that's kind of where I live. I live in the dualities. I live in the connections between all of these different spaces and these different worlds. Luckily, what's happened in the last 20 to 30 years for perfumery is that it has shifted towards a more female perspective, and now part of my mission is to represent women of color in perfumery and in arts in general, specifically Arab and North African women, because they're not a part of any outward agenda, if that makes any sense. So the only way that I can make a place for myself is by representing my people, representing stories that haven't been told yet, which is why I try to shift from the Eurocentric lens of perfumery and focus more on the historic aspect of perfumery, on the scent and role of ritual in Arab, Middle Eastern, North African cultures, and other cultures other than Europe. And naturally, as an Arab woman, I claim my space by talking about it, by representing, by sharing, and by trying to include as many people as possible. I definitely think that my cultural background influences my work. Intuitively, it's completely a part of me. I cannot remove the fact that I'm an Arab person out of my system. As an immigrant to Canada, it's actually something that I try to hold on to even more. And I've been told by other people that they can smell my cultural influence in my work. I'm not sure what that means yet. Everyone has their own signature, but I think it's because I have a very natural affinity to spices and materials that we find in the Middle East. So perhaps that could that could be the most obvious influence, but I definitely want to come from a place of informing and representing. So I want to be able to clarify the different scents that are used in different parts of the Arab world and represent that. So automatically it's a part of me, but I also try to do it on purpose in some perfumes or in some stories or aspects of the art. They might perceive me with some confusion, I think, because I'm not one to be placed in any one box or another. So most people don't know how to classify me. I'm an Arab girl who grew up in the Gulf but was born in Europe and lived in France and the US and in Canada, and I have all of these different disciplines and worlds within me, and my brand is a true representation of that. It's a very third culture brand in that sense. So they might perceive it as strange or out of the box, or maybe I hope that it would elicit curiosity more than anything. I came back to Montreal to start my brand because I felt that there was no conversation about scent or perfume in a French environment, and I felt that, and I do believe that perfume and Montreal can exist, and Montreal is a very rife place for experimentation, and it's really open to artists. So I felt like it was a good place for me to live comfortably and learn more about myself and explore myself and what my brand wanted to be in a very casual environment, let's say. By taking it one day at a time, by reminding myself what my mission is, by being kind to myself, because that's really the hardest thing, and to remind myself that I have a bigger purpose and that this is bigger than me and beyond me. My perfumes, my latest perfumes, Nar and Mare, are my representations of my duality, because I am Lebanese Egyptian, and they're very, very different cultures, but they're also so beautiful and so rich. And so what I wanted to do with this new collection, which was my Tarab collection, was to represent two different countries in a positive way and in a more nostalgic way, if you will, and to represent them, to change the discourse about the Arab world in general, to have something more beautiful and rich and more positive than what is being told to the Western world. And it's also a representation of Arabic music, because Arabic music is completely structured differently than Western music, and it's highly emotional and it's technically structured differently, so I felt that that would be an interesting way to inform my work and how I created those scents. But most importantly, I wanted to represent the Arab world and my family. Mare is inspired by Fairuz's song Shaif al-Bahr, and it's all about the vastness of Beirut and the mountains, the convergence of the mountains and the sea. And it's one of my father's, she's one of my father's favorite artists, and I wanted to represent his love for his country and his patriotism and everything that we love about our own countries through that song, and how much we love Fairuz and how many people love her and how she represents an entire nation and more. And Nar is the other side of that, so it's very fiery, it's really fire in Arabic, and it's inspired by Abdul Halim Hafiz and his song Hubbak Nar, and he sang that song at my grandparents' wedding. So he asked the bride, my grandmother, what do you want to hear? And she said Hubbak Nar, and that's kind of the story of the duality of love and pain and all of that, and I wanted to represent that, and I wanted to gift that to my grandparents because they were quite instrumental in my creativity, I find. They're huge inspirations to me. And I wanted to also represent La Belle Époque, you know, like the golden era of Cairo at the time, which was late 1950, early 1960s. Perfumery in general became a gender-based industry as a marketing tool, I think in the early 20s, 30s. But perfumers don't create from a place of gender or bias in that sense. So we have the control to do whatever we want, and I feel like what's happening is that we're taking cues from the world and we're going back to the original aspect of creating perfumery, which is just concept or idea or feeling and emotion. So it's never been about gender, and I never want to make it about gender. I mean, CK1, let's talk about CK1 for a second. That came out in the early 90s. That's a pure representation of what marketing can do. So they marketed it as a unisex fragrance. It could have been that a man or a woman or someone who doesn't identify as either could love that scent and really feel very connected to it. So I'm just going back to that. What I do is I just hear a song, or I try to represent that artist in as many ways as possible, but primarily scent. And because, again, there's so many connections between scent and sound, I naturally find ways to communicate what they're communicating, but through scent. And what we do is we add the scent to their already quite visual or audiovisual experience, and what that does is it creates a much stronger connection with the audience. And because smell is the strongest sense linked to memory, what happens is that the audience takes that experience and doesn't forget it. So by connecting those two very deeply feeling senses, it enhances the experience for everyone. So the first time I did this was with an amazing artist and friend called Henora. I used fans, I used hot plates, and I would go on the stage kind of like a ninja and just create scents which were inspired by each song. So I'm creating an entire soundscape based on her performance. And then her finale was, she created this huge tarp, and then we put Velcro, and the Velcro was sewed onto the fabric. And we used a pulley system where me and the dancers pulled it up as she performed, and underneath were cotton and wool balls that were put on the Velcro. And the audience would take that, and that piece was scented, and you could also scan it with a QR code that would go straight to her song. So that was the most experimental way, but I found that it was a very strong, tactile scent, very multisensory, immersive experience, but also people loved it so much that they could take it home and they wanted that scent and they remembered that performance just because of, one, because she was amazing, but two, because of that experience. Otherwise, I also create merch, so creating oils or something that the musician can sell alongside their t-shirts, their jackets, their socks, whatever they're selling at the event. And then also I have this gadget called a scent speaker, and the scent speaker is immersed or flooded in scent with these like ceramic tiles, and it goes in and you could basically turn on the volume, and that's kind of how it works. Quite a few things. I'm going into the culture, so we have scent music culture aspect of things. I've been working very long on a perfume called Fayoum, so it's inspired by this oasis in Egypt where all of these amazing artisans create pottery under the sunlight and under palm trees, so I wanted to recreate that. And I want to talk more about different cultures in the Middle East and experiences like that. I'm also working on a project with multiple local musicians, so taking their music and working with a whole other creative process, so taking their process, my process, and seeing what happens, and a lot more. I guess you're just gonna have to wait.